From the Blind Ability Studios, it's Wellness Wednesday with your host, Beth Gustin and Robin Ennis.
What is it for you that is kind of your red flags of like, whoa, this isn't working for me? Listen to those.
How do you know, paying attention to your body, right? Noticing those warning signs or internal signals to let you know, hey, something's wrong within this relationship.
One thing that I have seen with my clients that comes out of this is the concept of ambiguous loss. And that leads to a second concept, again, different topic, most likely, of ambivalent grief.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Christy Gilson, and I've been a listener to your podcast for several years. First, praise for you. I just really have so much respect for the way that you allow our community to flourish and delight in ourselves, which we get so few other places, but you also bring a perspective of respect for each person, not just people that are within the community that makes you the most comfortable. So I really respect you, and I thank you for that. I have a quick message for Robin and Beth. Robin and Beth, hi. My name is Christy. I've been a social worker in the past and currently am doing my own work in my own therapy. I had two ideas for feedback for you guys. I love your segment, by the way, and I think you're very noble for doing it. I also am very grateful that one of you is blind, so we're speaking from our lived experience as opposed to something from a textbook. My two feedback ideas are, what strategies do we use to stay calm when we're lost? I mean, really lost, the middle of nowhere, don't have anyone around to help us. And also, what strategies can we use when our dignity is just taking a hit, like someone says hello as they're walking by and we think they're talking to us and they're really on their phone. This happens to us all. How do we get out of that and not feel bad about ourselves? Those are my feedback ideas for you. Thank you all so much.
So we thank you, Christy, for your feedback. We received your message, and this is Beth, and we just wanted to acknowledge that, first of all, actually both of us are blind that do the podcast. And secondly, we've all been there when it comes to the dignity piece. We've all, I think, said hello to someone else's cell phone conversation, or we've all kept talking when someone leaves the room and forgets to tell us, or we've all said excuse me to a tree thinking it was a person, things like that. And so we are going to address next month's topic of rumination and intrusive thoughts, because oftentimes if we experience enough of these things that you described and I just shared, it's hard to keep our self-esteem up. It's hard to not think about the fact that, well, I don't want to go out in public because I might embarrass myself if I talk to a lamppost. So I appreciate you sharing your experience, and I appreciate you bringing up the feedback. And I do think it's going to make for a good future topic.
Yes, Christy, this is Robin. And going off of what Beth said, thank you very much for reaching out with those insightful questions that you have. And they are very much relatable, especially, I can think of a lot. I've been blind for a little over 20 years. And there's many times where I've talked to people and they weren't talking to me, or, scenarios that Beth had mentioned earlier. We definitely want to talk more about that in the next podcast. Another question that you have mentioned too is about that sense of how do you maintain a sense of calmness in the midst of loss or not having a support system around you. And that can be really isolating, right? I can imagine that can be a lonely feeling. And so it's really wondering, okay, do you really feel like you don't have people around you, or is it the people that you want near you, but they're not present? And so those are two things to ask yourself, and really trying to dive deep within in your life right now and really look at the supports that may be around you. Some people, when I worked for the crisis line, their support was their dog or their cat. And so that can be a really helpful support system, right? They keep a person calm, they interact with people. And so it's trying to really dive deep and figure out your resources, if that answers your question. And again, we can talk about more of that in future podcasts as well, because that is a good point. And people do feel, I think, a sense of lack of support system, during the summer months, I can imagine, because it's a lot more family time, family oriented time. And especially, around the holidays, that can be another time too, that people can really feel that.
This is Beth, and I just want to quickly add around that. When it comes to support, it's also important to think outside the box. So not only is it our pets that are supportive if we have them, maybe it's a neighbor Maybe it's person in your place of worship, if you have one that you don't talk to very often, but they reach out. Give them a chance. Maybe support could be watching YouTube or listening to favorite music or watching a favorite movie. It's not talking with someone, but it's a distraction, and that gives you a different kind of support for yourself. And so thinking about all the different ways support can look. Is it a massage? Is it getting your nails done or having your hair cut? That's also support. And so I know you weren't talking about it in those exact terms, but I think it's helpful to think outside the box of your own different ways we can feel uplifted and feel better. To be creative.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Hello and welcome back to Wellness Wednesday. My name is Beth Gustin, a licensed professional counselor in Colorado, and I'm here with my co-host, Robin Ennis, a licensed clinical social worker also in Colorado. We are here today to talk about a rather not so fun but important topic of relationship rifts or strained, unhealthy relationships or relationship estrangement. I think all fits in this category. So what we're talking about essentially is how do you navigate those relationships where maybe you're an adult parent and your adult children don't have contact with you, or you don't have contact with them, or the contact is extremely strained. Or maybe we're talking about a marriage where it's almost like you're just two ships passing in the night. You don't want to get divorced, you don't want to separate, but you don't have anything really holding you together anymore. And that can cause a lot of relationship strain. So that is our topic for today. And Robin, is there anything you'd like to add to explaining this topic or defining the topic?
Right. No, you defined it really well in summarizing what we're going to talk about. I do want to add too, throughout our discussion, we will discuss how do you know, paying attention to your body, right? Noticing those warning signs or internal signals to let you know, hey, something's wrong within this relationship. Or, hey, I really miss this person. I really wish we could fix it. What type of physical attributes that you're feeling to help gauge that type of discussion with yourself.
Yes, I appreciate you bringing that up, Robin, because I think it's important to pay attention to that gut feeling. So before the relationship has fully ended, which we'll get to in a minute, how do you know it's not healthy? Do you have that kind of roller coaster anxiety feeling when you're going to drop down that hill in your stomach? Do you have clammy hands? Are you shaking? Do you dread talking to them? Do you dread seeing them? Do you feel kind of foggy brained? Is it hard to think of your words? Is it hard to state your needs? What is it for you that is kind of your red flags of like, whoa, this isn't working for me? Listen to those.
Right. And it's really important, Beth, you named all of the symptoms, right, of anxiety and panic. And it's really important to pay attention to those signs because in a healthy relationship, you're going to feel happy, right? Joyful, looking forward to talking to the person, not that sense of doom or that sense of dread. So that should be a red flag in that moment and saying, hey, what's going on to cause me to have these feelings? And how can I be able to approach them in an open, honest way with the person that I'm having these feelings in regards to, right? So it goes back to what we talked about the last time we had the podcast with vulnerability. And this really does cause yourself to be more vulnerable with that person and trying to figure out where your relationship is at right now. And if either of you wanted to move forward together or if you need to separate, create distance for a bit.
I think sometimes when we're talking about creating distance, it can be really hard to actually have that conversation. So what a lot of people tend to do is just start backing away, being less responsive, spending less time together. Ghosting is maybe an extreme of this. I think it's really hard to have that conversation to say, I'm really activated when we're spending time together. I need a break. I need to spend less time. I need to not spend time here in this environment. It's hard to have those conversations. Whether it's out of fear or safety, we don't want to hurt somebody. There's a lot of reasons why we don't want to have that conversation. And sometimes we can't have, or it isn't safe to have that conversation. But if we're able to, I think it's important to say, I'm going to step away for these reasons so that I can take care of myself.
Right. And that's the key point, Beth, is that to step away so that each person can take care of themselves. Because when you're in the midst of an argument or a toxic relationship, it's hard to think clearly and it's hard to be able to communicate clearly. So that's why both people need to be in a place where they're able to discuss rather than argue. And there's I can't remember, Beth, maybe you know who thought of it, but there's a saying, and it's called, or an acronym, and it's called JADE. And J is don't justify, A is don't argue, D is don't defend, and E is don't explain. And so it's JADE. All of those components can equal to an argument going around in circles and circles and nothing being productive coming out of it. And so when you're able to step away from a situation or a relationship for a bit to gain more clarity and then come back together, if it's safe or if feasible, then you can develop more clear insight onto what went wrong or what is going wrong in the relationship and how or if it can be fixed.
With the JADE acronym, I don't know who originally came up with that, so I apologize. I'd like to give credit where it's due. Another way to work with this is if you're getting heated and you are finding yourself jading, if I can use that word, I think it's important to call a timeout. And it's okay to say, you know what, this conversation's not getting us anywhere. Can we please come back and discuss this at noon tomorrow, where we can cool off, come back with some solutions, and really talk through what makes sense. And you set that time and you honor that time. But it's helpful to come back within about 24 hours if you can. Otherwise, too much time goes by and it doesn't get resolved.
Right. And when it doesn't get resolved, then it festers. And people tend to push it down. And then when you push things down, as I tell my clients, eventually what goes down must come back up. And so that's when people tend to blow up at each other. And then the escalation keeps continuing. So all of these things can lead to or contribute to relationship risks or conflicts. It's really stepping back and realizing what value does this relationship hold to you, and whether you feel like it's being energizing or draining, and how you feel like you want to move forward and proceed.
And this may be a whole separate topic we can consider discussing, but one thing that I have seen with my clients that comes out of this is the concept of ambiguous loss. And we typically think of ambiguous loss around someone who has Alzheimer's, where they're physically present, but they're not really here anymore. Or we think about it with immigration, for example, when someone has had to be deported and their family is here. So they're still very much alive, but not physically present. But I also think ambiguous loss fits when we are talking about relationships where there is no contact anymore, because people are still living, but not in your life. And that leads to a second concept, again, different topic, most likely, of ambivalent grief. Whereas when we are estranged and we don't have contact, or the relationship we have is very ambivalent and rocky, that leads to a very ambivalent grief process if one party dies. So I don't want to go off on a major tangent here, but I'm thinking future topics might be in order.
I agree. I think those are really two great points that we could have two separate podcasts off of. Many times I have heard people say if they've had prolonged no contact with a family member or friend, they'll say, oh, it's like they're dead to me. So I think that kind of goes off what you're saying, Beth. And I imagine that it really is hard, right? Because they don't have that sense of closure. And it's always that what ifs, what are they doing right now? Or what if we would have worked it out? That can be hard to navigate.
Yeah, so with that comes a lot of, if they're deceased, now I cannot work it out.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's a lot that comes up with that. I do think it's probably a separate topic because I do want to stick with our current topic for today, but I wanted to highlight those two things because I think those are very common occurrences I see in my work with clients that happen as a result of these relationship rifts.
And one thing that I see with my clients in terms of relationship rifts is if they're currently in the relationship, the need to stay in it because they feel like they won't get anything better, especially if it's a romantic relationship. Or if the relationship has ended, again, they feel like it's that level of doom or feeling like they won't get anything or anyone better. And so that's where self-esteem comes into play and really valuing yourself. And again, if you feel like if one party is not making you feel good about yourself, it's really important for you to be able to find a safe space or a situation where you feel that you are being treated the way that you deserve to be treated, because nobody deserves to be treated unfairly or poorly in any type of relationship. So that's what I find is that it's more so a lot of self-esteem challenges that cause people to stay in a highly toxic relationship or one with risks in it.
completely agree. And I think it might be worth, in our scope of practice, a topic on domestic violence
Yes.
in intimate partnerships, only because it's helpful to talk about safety and ways you can keep yourself safe. And if you do need to leave, how would that look?
Yes.
So I just want to highlight that as well. We're talking about this. Make sure if you have to leave, you have a plan in place to do that.
Yes. Agreed. Looks like, Beth, we have quite a few topics that we can do podcasts with, but that is very important with what you said. Now that we talked about the physical warning signs of how you can tell that a relationship is not healthy, what are the different signs that may persist? So now we can talk about, okay, so now that you've had that space and that clarity, what are some ways that you can process on how you want to act on it or move forward? I like the pros and cons list. I had some of my clients do that in terms of relationships. What are the pros of the relationship and what are the cons of the relationship? And if the pros outweigh the cons, then that's a good sign. And so that's how you can either reach out to the person if you haven't talked to them in a long time and start from there. Again, it's scary, right? Because nobody likes to be that first person to reach out. And so that would be causing yourself to be vulnerable. And so making sure that you're in the right space to be able to do that. And again, you can't predict on how somebody will act or react. So if they choose not to respond, then that's okay. At least you put forth the effort in whatever decision that you want to make.
Yes. And I think along with that, if you have chosen to stay in a relationship, but you need to talk through some things and resolve some things, I'm a firm believer in I statements. So when you're bringing something up that you would like to see differently or that is hard for you, I think it's, I feel blank when I experience blank, or what I would like to see differently is blank. But you don't want to say the word you, because you can put people on the defensive.
Right. That is very true. And that's another thing that I definitely process with my clients, Beth, is what you exactly said. That's a big conflict resolution skill, is using the I feel statements, because that does lower the other person's guard and causes them not to feel attacked. You're naming a feeling and you're naming why you're feeling that way. You could also talk about what you feel could be different in whatever situation's causing you to feel that way.
Exactly. Highlighting, I love the pros and cons list. I like, there's a lot of different techniques to help yourself decide, A, if you're going to stay, and B, how you want to communicate. And I think that's probably, I keep a generalized topic for the future. But I think, around communication styles, there's different ways to express your needs. We always talk about assertive communication versus passive or aggressive, because assertive is where you're being firm, but you're being kind, is how I explain it. And so just kind of stating what you need. And we're going to talk about boundaries in the next podcast, which I think is where we're heading with this conversation, because all of these things set us up to talk about boundaries and healthy boundaries. Well
said. Is there anything else that you want to mention that you feel like we haven't talked about, Beth, in regards to relationship risks and conflict?
Not that I can think of right now, but as always, if you have comments or questions or future topic ideas, please reach out and let us know. We do read them, we do receive them, and we do try to respond to them either on this podcast or personally. So please reach out if you have any suggestions or feedback.
Right. And we most definitely appreciate people commenting, like Beth said. And I know we received a comment in regards to accountability about how they engage in self-care to make themselves more accountable. And so we love hearing from you. Yeah, please feel free to reach out. Until next time, take care.
Have a good week.
You can send Beth and Robin a message at 612-367-6093 or by email at info@blindabilities.com. They'd love to hear from you.
When we share
what we see
through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap
between the limited expectations and the realities
of blind abilities.